Nigeria is actually sending a clear message, ladies and gentlemen, at a major public event in Kebbi State. Ladies and gentlemen, President Bola Tinubu Ahmed stood before citizens and of course security officials and made a firm promise or vow. He said the fight against banditry and of course insecurity will actually be won. He said the fear that once affected farmers, fishermen and of course families is actually coming to an end. This statement, ladies and gentlemen, was actually made during or amid the 61st Agungu International Fishing Festival. The event had once struggled due to security concerns. Now it returned with a celebration and of course calm. The president said this peace didn't actually happen accidentally. He said it came from steady investment in security, better intelligence, and of course work with local communities.
Pleased to note that significant progress has been made in combating insecurity across Kebbi and other parts of our nation. We are still working very hard through coordination and coordinated efforts between the federal government, state government, and security agencies. We have men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line to safeguard and protect our sovereignty and keep our peace. The relative peace we are witnessing today in this region is not accidental. It is the result of sustained investment in security, intelligence gathering, and community engagement. I assure you that the fight against insecurity of any kind of banditry and insurgents will be won. Our farmers, including the fishermen, traders, and families, will be able to go about their lives without let or hindrance. This festival in itself is a testament to the return of stability and normalcy.
Sorry for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen. Please let me actually remind you that this particular community is actually meant to analyze African development every single day. So please, for actually watching this particular video, and you happen to be a Pan-African or a patriotic African, please make sure that again to give us your support, okay, by liking this particular video, subscribing, and turn on notifications, okay, because your support happen to be a fuel which is actually going to energize us and keep us analyzing every single day with you.
South Africa appreciates the report on the state of peace and security on our continent, and like to congratulate and thank President Al-Sisi for his leadership. South Africa remains concerned about worsening conditions of conflict and war and instability on our continent. We wish to reaffirm our wavering commitment to the vision of a peaceful, prosperous and integrated Africa as articulated in Agenda 2063. As we meet here, a number of African countries are currently under suspension from our union due to unconstitutional changes of government, thus reversing the democratic gains and development of our continent. The slow transition to constitutional order by the suspended countries is a matter of concern. There must be demonstrable and comprehensive political engagement to assist any suspended country to navigate their respective transitions successfully and speedily, and to ensure that they do not slide back into conflict. The situation in the Sudan remains of concern to all of us. We reiterate our call for all warring parties to lay down their arms immediately and to allow unfettered humanitarian access, and most importantly, embark on an inclusive national political dialogue as the only way towards sustainable resolution. With respect to the recent political security developments in South Sudan, we are concerned about the stability in South Sudan. South Africa, together with other C5 members and members of IGAD, will be hosting a C5 Plus summit here in Addis to consolidate the peace in South Sudan. South Africa remains concerned about the prevailing security and humanitarian situation in the Eastern DRC, despite several mediation and peace processes. We reiterate that the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the DRC must be upheld and respected. We condemn the continued capture of territories by M23/AFC in Kivu and Ituri provinces. Such actions must be corrected decisively. South Africa has assumed the role of the regional oversight mechanism for DRC and the region. During our tenure, we will work with all signatory countries to the framework to find a durable solution to this protracted conflict that must be brought to resolution.
There was something deeper in his tone, ladies and gentlemen. Guess what? He spoke not just about safety, he spoke about stability, he spoke about development. He linked or connected security to food supply and, of course, economic growth. That link was matters, ladies and gentlemen. At the same time, or simultaneously from Kebbi State, another important message was actually being delivered on the continental stage at the African Union meeting in Addis Ababa, ladies and gentlemen, in Ethiopia. South Africa's President Ramaphosa addressed the Peace and Security Council report. His words were actually calm, ladies and gentlemen. His tone was actually firm. He said several African states or countries facing suspension from the African Union due to unconstitutional changes of government. He said such actions weaken democratic progress and, of course, slow growth across the continent. He did not actually name specific countries or states, but across Africa, ladies and gentlemen, observers understood that these statements connect to states like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which actually formed the AES alliance after military transitions. The message was actually indirect, yet it was actually clear. Two leaders, two stages, one continent facing deep security and, of course, governance questions. In Nigeria, the focus was actually defeating armed groups and, of course, restoring order. As the AU, ladies and gentlemen, the focus was on political system and, of course, constitutional order. The tension between security action and, of course, political structure began to take shape. Now, the situation moves further. President Ahmed Tinubu's message was actually clear. He praised security forces. He said intelligence gathering has actually improved. He said communities are now working with authorities to make sure that they protect their areas or zones. This shows a strategy built on cooperation, but the story did not actually end there, ladies and gentlemen. Guess what? Peace in one region often or always depends on stability in many others. Nigeria shares borders with Niger. The wider Sahel region has actually seen political transitions and, of course, rising armed activity in recent years. That creates pressure at the African Union. President Ramaphosa expanded his remarks or statement. He spoke about Sudan. He actually called for an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian access. He spoke about Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where insecurity continues despite mediation efforts. He condemned the continued capture of territory by armed groups in Eastern DRC. Then he returned to governance. He stressed that unconstitutional changes of government threaten Africa's democratic progress, ladies and gentlemen. Again, he didn't actually mention the AES state directly or clearly, but the statement aligned closely with the situation in Mali, Burkina Faso, and, of course, Niger, where military-led governments have actually taken control in recent years. These countries or states have actually since formed the Alliance of Sahel States known as AES. South Africa's message supported African Union principles. The AU framework emphasized constitutional order and civilian rule. This created a quiet but serious contrast. On one side, governments in the Sahel argue they are actually restoring security first. On the other side, AU leadership actually insists political structure must actually follow agreed rules. The situation didn't actually end there. South Africa also announced it will actually help strengthen regional oversight efforts, including the work related to DRC and, of course, South Sudan. South Africa's statement about unconstitutional changes was not random. It came at a time when AES countries or states are actually redefining their relationship with regional blocs. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have actually moved from ECOWAS structures and formed their own alliance. They actually argue that strong national control is actually necessary to defeat armed groups and of course rebuild sovereignty. South Africa did not actually directly criticize them, but by stating that AU suspension can actually follow unconstitutional transition, it sent a clear institutional signal. The message was actually about standards or principles. Africa now stands at a careful crossroads. Nigeria is actually pushing to secure its northwest. Okay, the government believes that peace supports farming, fishing, and of course national growth. South Africa is actually pushing for adherence to constitutional principles or rules across the continent of Africa. In the months ahead, cooperation between states will actually matter more than rivalry. If security gains in Nigeria continue, they may serve as a model for community-based stabilization. If the AU strengthens oversight, whilst inspecting national context, it may actually reduce tension between institutions and of course the transitional government. The long-term impacts will actually shape regional partnerships. The Sahel remains important for West Africa's security, ladies and gentlemen. African Union remains central for continental unity. Calm leadership will be required. Strong voice must be matched with responsible action. This story is not just about division, it is actually about direction, ladies and gentlemen. Africa's growth depends on safety, lawful governance, and of course cooperation. President Tinubu's vow or promise reflects agency on security. President Ramaphosa's statement, ladies and gentlemen, reflects agency on democratic order. Together, they actually show that Africa is actually actively debating how best to secure its future. The outcome or consequence will actually influence food security, economic stability, and of course continental unity for years to come. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this particular video. If you actually value serious and of course respectful African stories, analysis, and development like this, please make sure again to like this particular video in case you haven't actually done it. And if you are new to this particular community, we need important and valuable people like you to join so that we can actually share analytical developments about Africa with you every single day. So make sure again to join by subscribing and turn on your notification bell so you won't miss subsequent videos.